All right, everyone get ready, because we are kicking off a deep dive that is going to totally change how you see the world.
I think you're right about that.
We're going to be looking at Seem Like a State by James C. Scott.
A classic.
It really is.
Yeah.
And over the next 4 episodes, we're going to be unpacking some of the key themes,
Oh, yeah.
exploring historical events, and I think we'll probably even have a few laughs along the way. So are you ready to do this?
Absolutely. I am. What I find so fascinating about Scott's work is how he shows us that states throughout history,
Mm-hmm.
they've tried to simplify and organize society,
Yeah.
and they often start with really noble intentions.
Right.
But it sometimes leads to some unintended consequences.
Okay, so you're telling me that good intentions can actually lead to bad outcomes. I mean, we've all seen that happen in our own lives, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But on a state level, that's kind of scary.
precisely.
Uh,
One of the key concepts that Scott introduces is this idea of legibility.
legibility.
Yeah. And it's basically about how states try to make complex societies
Yeah.
more legible.
More
Yeah.
legible.
Right. They want to understand and manage things from the top down.
Okay.
So think about standardized systems like property records, last names, even the layout of cities.
It's all about control then.
It's about creating order and control, for sure.
So wait, you're saying that something as basic as like a last name is a tool of state control?
Mm-hmm.
I never even thought about it this way before.
It's true. Before standardized last names, things were much messier.
Yeah.
People were known by their village, their parentage, or even their occupation.
Oh, wow.
And it made it really hard to keep track of them and tax them.
Yeah.
But with a fixed last name, you basically become a data point,
Right.
an easily identifiable unit in the state system.
Wow. Okay, that makes sense.
Uh.
But so is legibility always a bad thing?
Well, that's where things get a little nuanced. It's not black and white.
Okay.
So, for example, think about public health initiatives.
Hmm.
They often rely on legibility,
Yeah.
tracking diseases, vaccinations, all of that.
Sure.
That can actually save lives. But then flip the script and you can see how it has the potential for surveillance and control,
Totally, yeah.
especially in the digital age. Have you ever gotten that creepy feeling
Oh, yeah.
that your phone is listening to you?
All the time.
Right. Well, that's legibility in action,
Oh.
for better or worse.
Okay, I'm starting to see what you mean. So states, they try to make things legible.
Mm-hmm.
That can be good or bad depending on the situation.
Exactly.
But where does this high modernist ideology fit in?
Yeah.
I feel like that's a big part of what Scott's arguing.
Oh, it is. High modernism is this almost utopian belief in the power of technology and rational planning to solve, like, all of society's problems.
Okay.
So think about massive infrastructure projects,
Okay.
ambitious agricultural schemes, even cities that are designed, like, from scratch.
Wow.
And Scott argues that when you combine this ideology with an authoritarian state,
Oh, boy.
things can get really bad.
So it's like they have this big grand vision, but they kind of forget about the messy reality
Exactly.
of like human behavior and how complex those systems are.
Yes, exactly. It's like a city might look amazing on paper,
Right.
but in reality, people don't always follow the plan.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And that's where these like disasters can happen.
Exactly. Scott uses this analogy of a work-to-rule strike,
Okay.
where workers, they follow the rules so meticulously that it ends up paralyzing the whole system,
Oh, wow.
which really highlights the importance of local knowledge, those
Yeah.
informal practices,
Right.
and adaptation, all the things that high modernists tend to overlook.
Because they just want everything to be in order.
They want perfect order, yes.
This is getting really interesting.
Good.
So what are some of the real world examples that Scott uses to talk about these ideas? Like what's the really juicy stuff?
We'll get ready because we're going to deep dive into some truly mind-blowing case studies in the next few episodes.
Okay.
We're going to look at the Great Leap Forward in China, collectivization in Russia, and forced villagization in Tanzania.
Okay. I've heard of the Great Leap Forward, but the other two are new to me. What happened in those?
Well, that's for the next few episodes.
Okay.
I will say that in each case, there is this combination of high modernist ideology
Right.
and these authoritarian states that were trying to reshape society based on this grand vision.
Yeah.
And the results were disastrous.
Disastrous how?
We're talking about famines, social upheaval, and a massive loss of life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I am definitely hooked now. I can't wait to hear more about these case studies.
Me too.
But before we wrap up this first episode, can you give us a little sneak peek at what Scott offers as an alternative?
Of course, Scott argues for something called messiahs, which is basically practical knowledge.
Practical knowledge.
The kind of wisdom that comes from experience and a deep understanding of a specific context.
Okay.
He believes that messiahs is really crucial for navigating complex systems.
Interesting.
Whether we're talking about agriculture, urban planning, or managing entire economies.
So it's not about throwing out planning completely,
No.
but more about recognizing the limits of planning.
Exactly.
And making space for flexibility,
Yeah.
local knowledge, and just adaptation.
Exactly. He advocates for a more collaborative and bottom-up approach, where local communities and all of that accumulated knowledge that they have, it's valued and included in decision-making.
That makes sense.
It's about recognizing how complex human societies actually are and the limits of our ability to control them.
This is going to change how I see the world.
I think so.
This is like a whole new way of thinking about the relationship between power, knowledge, and all of the unintended consequences
It is.
of our actions.
Absolutely. And you know what's interesting is that even though Scott really focuses on the actions of states, his ideas, they're relevant to all kinds of organizations and systems, even on a smaller scale.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Well, think about a large corporation that's trying to enforce this top-down structure without actually considering the expertise of its employees who are working on the ground.
That makes sense.
The same principles apply.
So this deep dive into seeing like a state.
Yeah.
This isn't just about history or politics.
Right.
It's about understanding the fundamental challenges of managing complex systems.
In any context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this so relevant to us.
It does. It really does. And, you know, one of the things that's so cool about Scott's approach is he doesn't just criticize, like he offers some hope.
Yeah.
He suggests that we need to embrace something that he calls Metis.
Metis. Okay, so what is Metis?
So it's a Greek term, and it essentially means practical knowledge.
Okay.
That wisdom that you gain from experience from, like, really understanding a specific context.
Okay, so, like, I can read about gardening in a book.
Yeah.
But to really know how to garden, I have to actually go out there, get my hands dirty, and, like, figure out what works best in my yard.
Exactly. That's a perfect example.
Okay, cool.
And Scott says this Metis is essential for navigating all of these complex systems, whether we're talking about agriculture, urban planning, or even managing entire economy.
So he thinks top-down planning fails because it doesn't take this into account.
Yeah, it overlooks this really crucial local knowledge.
Okay, so let's go back to those real-world examples that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
The Great Leap Forward collectivization in Russia, forced villagization in Tanzania. What can we learn from those?
So each of those cases shows the dangers of ignoring Metis.
Okay.
So take, for example, the Great Leap Forward in China. Mao Zedong's government, they had this really ambitious plan to rapidly industrialize the country.
Okay.
They wanted to boost agricultural production.
Yeah.
So they decided to collectivize farms, force people into communes.
I mean, that sounds pretty efficient in theory.
Exactly. It sounds good on paper, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is that they totally disregarded all the deep knowledge that farmers had about the local soil conditions, the crop varieties, the traditional farming practices.
Oh, wow.
And this disregard for Metis had some pretty disastrous consequences.
Like what?
Crops failed, famine ensued, and millions of people died.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it was really bad.
So I'm guessing something similar probably happened in Russia with collectivization.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Stalin's government also wanted to modernize agriculture.
Okay.
And they did that by collectivizing farms. So they thought that large mechanized farms would be so much more productive than those small individually owned farms.
Of course.
And again, they didn't pay attention to the local knowledge of those peasant farmers who had developed these really intricate systems of crop rotation, livestock management, and land allocation.
And that was all adapted to their specific region.
Exactly. And you know what happened? Another man-made famine that killed millions.
It's just so sad, these grand visions, you know, these attempts to impose order and efficiency, and then they end up having these devastating consequences.
They do.
Because they don't account for how complex human societies and ecosystems actually are.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
And the case of forced villagization in Tanzania under Julius Nyerere is another really stark lesson.
What happened there?
And so Nyerere, he had this vision of creating these modern socialist villages where people would have access to things like education, healthcare, and, you know, better farming techniques.
Oh, good intention.
Exactly. But The forced relocation of people disrupted those traditional social structures. It undermined existing agricultural systems, and it often led to economic hardship.
It backfired.
It did.
Yeah, they didn't think about the local context, the social fabric, the ways that people were already adapted to their environment.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Scott's main argument.
Okay.
He's not saying that all planning is bad. Right. It's just that he's cautioning against a very specific type of planning.
Okay.
The type that's driven by this belief in the absolute power of reason and technology, the kind that wants to impose uniformity and control from above, and ignores that vital role of local knowledge and adaptation.
Okay, so what can we do? Are we just doomed to repeat all these mistakes, or is there a better way?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
But luckily, Scott does give us some guidance.
Okay, what is it?
So he says that we need to have a more humble approach.
Okay.
One that recognizes that our knowledge is limited.
Yeah.
And really stresses the importance of local expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And he says we need to shift from this mindset of control to one of adaptation.
So instead of trying to, force a plan on a situation, we should be more flexible.
Exactly.
More responsive to feedback and more willing to just admit when we're wrong and learn from those mistakes.
Exactly. It's about embracing complexity.
Okay.
Valuing diversity and recognizing that there are so many different ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And then creating systems that are resilient, that can adapt to change, that allow for experimentation and that learning from the bottom up.
I love that. It's funny, as you were talking about that, I kept thinking about how Scott talks about beehives in the book.
Yeah.
He uses that as a metaphor for this top-down way of planning, doesn't he?
He does. He contrasts those modern standardized beehives.
Yeah.
You know, the ones that are designed so that the beekeeper can easily inspect them and get the honey out?
Yeah.
With the ones that bees make in the wild. You know, those more chaotic structures.
So the modern beehive, that's like the legible system.
Exactly.
All about control and efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's not so resilient.
Yeah, maybe not so adaptable.
And then the wild beehive.
Yeah.
It might not be as efficient.
Right.
But it can handle all those unexpected problems.
Exactly. It can adapt to those changing conditions.
I see that now, like these big social engineering projects that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
They were like those modern beehives.
Yes.
All impressive and orderly.
But so brittle.
And if something went wrong,
they fell apart.
Scott's saying that we need to learn from that.
Yes.
We shouldn't try to make everything so legible and controlled. We need to be more like those wild beehives. More organic, more decentralized, more responsive to what's happening. I think I'm really starting to get what Scott's saying now. It's not just about criticizing what happened in the past.
It's much bigger than that.
It's like a whole new way of thinking about how power and knowledge work together and how much we can actually control.
And I think he's challenging us to rethink what we believe about progress and efficiency.
Right.
And just the nature of complex systems.
I have to say, this is kind of scary.
Yeah, it can be a little unsettling.
But it's also exciting.
I agree.
It's like he's saying it's okay to admit that things are messy.
Right.
And that we don't have all the answers. And that we should actually listen to all those different ways of knowing things.
It is a real shift in perspective.
It is. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, how do we actually use all of this?
It feels like a lot.
I think the first step is just being aware.
Okay.
Noticing when we're doing this, seeing like a state thing in our own lives, in our institutions, in the systems all around us.
And once we can see it,
we can start to do things differently.
Maybe we should all be more like those wild beehives.
Yeah.
Just embrace a little more of that chaos.
I love that.
A little more diversity. Experiment a little more.
What would happen if we let go of trying to control everything?
I think James C. Scott would like that idea.
I think so too.
Well, this deep dive into seeing like a state has been incredible.
I've really enjoyed it.
My mind is blown. I can't wait to really get into those case studies in the next few episodes.
Me too.
This is just the beginning.
It is.
There is so much more to discover.
So much more to learn.
Make sure you come back next time when we start looking at our first case study.
The Great Leap Forward in China.
You do not want to miss it.